Hi, Vedi. Snehal. Oh, from Australia. That's great. What's the time there?
Hi, Samuel.
Hi, Vedi. Snehal, Samuel, Krish, Cassie, Sayam, Hit Hitardi. I'm sorry if I haven't pronounced your name correct. Jia, Prisha, Soham, Dhwanil, Arvin. Oh, you're from Canada. That's great. We have a really diverse set of people today. We're really glad to see that.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining in today's session. I think we're going to start right now, and as more people join in, we'll introduce themselves and ourselves to them too. And let's just not waste more time and we'll get right to it. So, we are Entrepreneurs Deck, and all of us have created like 13 to 15 different modules to help to help you guys understand what entrepreneurship is all about. We are a student-led initiative came up by students all across the country and abroad, aiming to help students realize their true potential as an entrepreneur. We want to prepare young individuals for what the future holds for them in an entrepreneur world. Through these sessions, we try to give you the knowledge and the experiences of different people and also for ourselves, so you are prepared to do something of your own, which is entrepreneurship in general. We also expect you to be as participative as you can in these sessions. Right now, I'm Smith Sutaria. I've been joining these sessions from the start and help found this entire project. We have Sara, Manav, Vedika, Priyanshi, Nikita, Sania, and another Nikita from all over the world. Sara is from Dubai. Most of us are from India, and Nikita Chanana is from Canada. As you guys, we are also part of a diverse team, and we know that diversity helps to help generate new ideas, and also everyone is able to come up with unique solutions to any problems given. We've also designed very interesting poll questions, breakout rooms, and other activities in these sessions. We hope that this is all very insightful for you, and I'm going to let Manav introduce himself and today's module.
Hi, guys. Welcome to the business plan module of Entrepreneurs Deck. Uh, today we have with us myself. I'm the leader of the business plan module. Then we have Nikita Shivani, Sara Dhume, Priyanshi Patel, Smith, our founder, and Sanya as our co-hosts. Um, before starting, I think Smith, can we get to the Zoom etiquette slide, please?
Yes.
Yeah. Before starting, I think I wanted to highlight some basics. Now, as most of you must be aware, we're using Zoom, so we expect you guys to have your videos on, your mics on mute, and we encourage you to use the raise hand function when you have questions. For any technical issues, you can approach Sanya. So kindly privately message her if you have any issues with maybe not being able to see the presentation, not being able to be a part of a breakout session, anything at all. You message Sanya, and yeah, that's it. Let's begin. Over to Sarah.
Okay, hi guys. Smith, could you please go to the next slide? Next. Okay, yeah, perfect. Okay, so we're starting off with what an introduction to a business plan is. So before we start, I would like to just get like the definition of a business plan out there. So I'll give you guys the answer, but I first want to hear from you guys. So I think I'll ask one or two of you to define it. So if you could use the raise hands button within the participants column, and just I'll pick on one or two of you and you can unmute yourself and share the answer with us. So if anyone would like to answer, please just raise your hand.
Guys, there is no right or wrong answer. Just take a wild guess. What do you understand by the words business plan?
All right, that's no problem. So I guess I'll give you the answer for now, and maybe you can participate a bit later when you're comfortable. So the way that we would describe a business plan is there's many definitions, but I think the simplest way to put it forward is it's just a written description of your business's future. Oh, thank you, Aryan, for that answer. And yes, you are correct. It is a written description of your business's future. It's just a document that describes in detail how a business, usually a new one, but every business does this, is going to achieve its goals and how they plan to do that. And since business plans are inherently strategic, creators of that plan make sure that every part of their business plan focuses on a clear set out strategy so that it's coherent to investors or just anyone who's trying to understand their business plan. So next we have the three primary parts of a business plan, and these are the three parts that make up almost every business plan. So you first have business concept, which is where you, thank you, Krish, where you discuss your industry, the business structure, the particular product or service you will be offering to your customers, and how you plan to just in general make your business a success. We then have the marketplace section, which is where this is the part where you have to describe and analyze potential customers. So who are these customers? What is their demographics? Where they're from? What makes them buy, and so on. And then lastly, we have something called a financial section. And this is what contains your plan on how to raise funds for expansion and invest the profits that your business makes efficiently. So stuff like private placements, IPOs, FPOs, etc., are all examples of raising funds. And these funds can then be distributed in terms of dividends and reinvested in the business if growth opportunities are available. Now, the financial section is very important because while your business plan needs to have great ideas, investors and just people who looking at your business ideas will be also interested in the finance more than anything else, because it's great to have a good idea, but if you don't know how to use your finances efficiently, you can't really make that business sustainable. So it's very important that a financial section is very thorough, clear, and efficient. All right, Smith, can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so sorry, 1 second. Yeah, okay. So now we're moving on to the 7 key components of a business plan. So although every business plan varies depending on what type of business you are and what the creator of the plan is trying to achieve, every good business plan should include a version of these key components in order for it to be clear to everyone else. So we first start off with something called an executive summary, which is just a brief introduction and summary of your business plan. So think of this like when you read a book, the back of the book always has like a brief blurb of the book. So this is sort of like that, but just for your business plan. We then have your business description, which is where you will outline vital details of your company, such as how big is your company, the location of your company, target audience, what are you offering, etc., etc. And then we have some, Smith, sorry, next slide. Right, okay. So then we have something called market strategies, and this is where you outline how your chosen industry functions. Which then leads you on to competitive analysis, because once you understand your market, you can then start to identify potential competitors and their position within that market alongside you, which then in a sense helps you strategize how to sustain your business alongside them or overtake them in a sense. Smith, next, please. Okay. So then the last three components that we have is design and development plan, which is, this is essential as this provides your investors with a description of the product's design, what its development looks like within production, and just how will you market it, market the product in your company, and just the budget that you're setting out to create this product and market it at the same time, and how that enables you to reach your goals. And then lastly, we have the financial factors. So again, like I mentioned, finance is a very important part of your business plan. So again, here, the financial factors determine whether or not your business idea is viable. And it will focus on and will there be any focus from investors who may be attracted to your business idea based on just not the idea, but also the finances. So the financial section is usually composed of three financial statements, which is the income statement, cash flow projection, and the balance sheet. So we've thrown a lot of information at you right now. I do understand that, but these definitions were necessary to get out of the way. So I think let's take 2 minutes. If any of you guys have any questions, you can unmute yourself and ask the question, or actually don't unmute yourself, raise your hand, put it in the chat, and we can get to you.
Guys, if you have any questions, please write it down on the chats, or if you are comfortable, use raise your hand feature and unmute yourselves and ask the questions to Sarah or any one of us. One more thing which I forgot to mention is, like yesterday, we are also going to announce word of the day today. Please make sure that you make a note of that word, because it will be used to type down in a form, which will assure that you have been attending these sessions, and also answer a few following questions, which will get you the certificates for these sessions. So please make sure when I announce the word, you note it down somewhere. Thank you.
All right, if there's no questions, that's not a problem. If at any point you feel like you have a question, just put it in the chat and we'll get to it eventually. Okay, Smith, next, please. Okay, so now we are moving on to types of business plans. So, sorry, 1 second. Okay, sorry, my Google Slides just like went haywire, so just give me a second to reload that. All right, okay, while that loads, I'll just start, I guess. Okay, so we have 5 types of business plans generally. So you start off with something called a startup business plan, which, like its name suggests, is just a basic business plan that articulates your vision for the business, documents your business journey, and it's just a basic business plan that helps you pitch your ideas to your investors. So this is usually the business plan that when someone is just starting off like an entrepreneur, someone who has a new business idea, they generally stick to this business plan. Moving on, we have the strategic business plan, which is based on the business's mid to long-term goals, and an operational business plan is details on how a team or department or even a singular person within your company will contribute to the business's goals and their plans to achieve them. Your growth business plan then is opposite to the strategic business plan, because this focuses on the short-term outlines for where the business sees itself in a year or two. And then lastly, we have something called a practicality business plan, which this plan describes the need present within your market for your product or service, and describes your target audience. So while these are the different categories of business plans, there's nothing stopping you from combining these business plans in one, or choosing one or two to like combine together to make your personalized business plan. Because at the end of the day, your business plan needs to suit your needs and needs to appeal to your targeted audience and your targeted investors and so on and so forth. So there's nothing stopping you from combining aspects of these business plans together and just creating your own business plan. All right. Smith, next, please.
Guys, give me a second. There's something wrong with my screen.
Personal funds, or whether you're hoping to get a loan from a bank or just investors in general, you will kind of put that aside. You will put in your expenses, so on and so forth, and then you'll see how much money you can actually realistically spend to develop this product or market this product, or in general just sell and manufacture this product. So that's how you spend the money. So which is why it's very important to have a strong financial section within your business plan, because without that, investors won't be likely to spend, nor will banks be likely to give you loans. So should the growth be a focus or practicality in the initial days? So again, at the end of the day, every business wants to be successful, and an aspect of that is growth. So it should be important, but obviously if you're a new business, you can't really estimate growth so fast. So I think this applies more to, depends on like, if you are an existing business who's just looking at a new business venture, then I feel like growth applies more to them. But I think it should definitely be a factor that's in the back of everyone's mind when creating a business plan. All right. Is there a business plan that is seen in industries as more professional? I don't think so. I will also ask my other co-hosts and hosts to like put in their input. I don't personally think so, because I think it's not like when someone reads your business plan, they instantly go like, oh, this is a growth business plan or this is a startup business plan. That is just something that helps you as beginners identify how to write a business plan. But when an investor or when another company reads your business plan, they don't categorize it like that. This is just more to help you understand that there are different types of business plans and you can merge aspects of them.
To add to what Sarah just said, yeah, she's right. Investors don't particularly look for, let's say, a format or a structure to a business plan. A business plan can be as unprecedented as possible, but of course, there are certain characteristics that they look in a successful business model, and that's something that we'll cover in later slides.
Yeah.
Right. Back to Sarah.
How do you plan to manage these potential problems, risks? Did you finish your sentence? Or I think you may have missed a part of that. How do you manage to manage these potential problems? So again, it depends on the potential problem, but in every business plan, you also have to be evaluative. You have to outline risks and potential solutions to them, because nothing is a smooth sail. Every business faces good and bad days. So I don't 100% get your question, but if you want to maybe rephrase it and put it again, I can answer it a bit later, but hopefully for now that answered your question. Okay, so I think just for time's sakes, we'll stop here. But if you guys have any questions, we can get to them at the end. So just put them in the chat and Sanya will take them down. So thank you guys. Moving on to target audience. So since I've thrown this word at you guys so much in like the past few slides, let's start off by defining what a target audience is. So I think there's so many definitions for target audience, just like there are for a business plan. There's no right or wrong answer, but I think an interesting definition is what advertising specialist Tom Duncan states, which is a target audience is a group that has a significant potential to respond positively to a brand message, and they usually fit within a similar demographic or a similar psychographic. So it's like that's what you would categorize as a target audience. And so to help you sort of understand this concept better, we've chosen an example. So I think we all know McDonald's. I hope we all know McDonald's. So I think it's obvious one of their primary target markets is children. So while that's a great thing, a problem with that is that their target market is children, which means that they don't have any purchasing power, which in simple terms means they cannot go and buy that product by themselves because they realistically don't have any money of their own, nor do they have really much control over any money that they have. So that purchasing power does not lie with them, and they rely on adults to like purchase these products for them. So the solution that, or somewhat of a solution to that McDonald's came up with is that they created the Happy Meal to serve their target market of children, because children prefer those smaller size meals with like the appeal of a toy and all of that. But when they advertise these Happy Meals, while they do appeal to kids, they also make sure that from a price point and from a value point, they appeal to parents more, because while their target audience, their primary target audience for the Happy Meal is kids or children, the person who's putting in the money for that product is the parents. So they need to make sure that they satisfy kind of both target audiences. So you can label that as a primary target audience and a secondary target audience. Um, so I think why we use this example is to just really solidify that it's really important to know your target audience, because when you know your target audience, you can create better products and services. And with a deep understanding of your audience, you can not only improve marketing and your products and services, but also you better understand problems that your audience faces. So while kids not having purchasing power is not a big problem to them, for a company that can be an issue, because again, when you're trying to market to kids, you have to be aware of it also has to be something that appeals to parents. Because if it's an unhealthy product, or if it's a product that's dangerous, while the kid may be on board to buy it, the person who's putting in the money may not. So it's very important to make sure that you know the problems your target audience faces and identify them correctly and improve your products and services with better aspects to like help appeal to them more. So that is it for introduction to business plan. Thank you so much for listening to me, and I'm going to hand it over to Manav now, who will explain business models to us.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Smith, can we move to the next slide, please? Right. So, what is a business model? A business model, in layman terms, is a company's plan for making profit. It identifies the products or services to be sold, its target market, and any anticipated expenses. Next slide, Smith. Right. There are four elements to a successful business model, being a customer value proposition, which broadly contains jobs, pains, and gains, a profit formula, key resources, and key processes. Let's go over what a customer value proposition is. A customer value proposition consists of the sum total of the benefits, or simply put, the overall value a customer derives out of your product or service. So let's go over jobs, pains, and gains. A job is the basic minimum purpose that you hire a product or service for. For instance, you'd hire a phone to make calls, right? That's the basic thing that you expect out of a phone. But when we get to gains refer to the additional benefit that your product provides. For example, the additional benefit a phone could provide could be, maybe it has an awesome camera, or it has great speakers that can help you stay entertained all day long. And when we get to pains in a business model aren't exactly as they sound. Here, by pains, we mean pains that are being relieved, customer pains that we are relieving. For instance, a smartphone is a versatile device that alleviates the pain of carrying a separate audio player, a telephone, a camera recorder, an answering machine, because it does all of that within one device. So that is a customer pain that we are alleviating. Profit formula, as the name itself is self-explanatory, refers to the profit-making strategy for your company. Key resources. Now, this is an important point. Key resources refer to certain resources that your firm's operations are dependent upon. It could be raw materials for a manufacturing business, or let's say an internet connection and wholesalers for an e-commerce website. These resources are pretty dynamic, and of course, they vary from business model to business model. But shortly, there are resources that your firm depends on to conduct its operations. Key processes refer to processes that enable the operations of a business. For example, for a metals business, right? Extracting metal from natural ore is the key process, because that is what enables the business as a whole. Now, these were some heavy terms, guys. So please let me know if you have any questions, or should I move ahead? Feel free to raise your hand or put them in the chat. Great. Dhwani says clear. What about the rest of you? Does anyone have any doubts at all? The last one. All right, sure, Vigyat. The last point was key processes. So key processes refer to the basic processes that enable your business. For example, let's say, now here we took the example of extracting metals, right? For instance, for a farmer, what would a key process be? A key process would be going out and cutting, maybe, let's say, cutting the crop, maybe removing weeds. Yeah, removing weeds can be a good example. Removing weeds out of the crop so that the harvest is pure and safe for you to eat. So that is the key process. It's an elemental part of providing you the good that is the crop that you buy. Does that make sense, Vigit? Okay. Sanil, yeah, thanks, Vigit. Sanil asks, so are processes stuff like production lines and transport of goods? Yes, Sanil, it could be that, but again, it depends on the business model. Now, if you are an import and export company, then yes, transportation of goods is a key process for you, right? Shipping, be it via a ship, an airplane, or a truck, is a key process for you because you are in the imports and export business. So yeah, you're getting it right, Sanil. That's exactly what I mean by key processes. Can you get to the next slide, Sven? All right. Choices as a part of business models. Now, when you form a business model, there are three key choices that you make. The first one being a policy choice. A policy choice is an action that an organization takes across all its operations. For instance, using non-union workers, or say locating plants in rural areas, encouraging employees to fly, coach class to save money. Then the second kind of choice is an asset choice. Now, this directly refers to tangible resources that a company deploys. It could be manufacturing facilities or satellite communication systems, for instance. Anything that directly involves the assets that a firm invests in is called an asset choice. Governance choices. Now, governance choices refer to a company's decision making policies over the other two choices. Roughly speaking, the authority of who decides what to invest and where. This could be a financial advisor, a chartered accountant, anyone who takes care of the financial side of goods or services in a company. This could include decisions like, is it prudent to own or say lease machinery, for example? So questions like that. Maybe it could be hiring laborers on a daily wage basis or on a contractual basis. Questions like that come under governance choices. Uh, am I clear? Or does anyone have any questions about choices as part of business models? Clear. Nice. Okay. Thanks, Smith. Now let's come to threats a robust business model must avoid. So there are four kinds of threats to a business model, and a robust business model for companies like Apple, companies like Nike that are deemed too big to fail, is is that they can avoid these risks easily. For instance, imitation. Now, with imitation, we mean, can competitors replicate your model easily? Is it easy to do what you're doing and make money? Hold up. Hold up refers to the leveraging ability of a customer, supplier, or any other player to capture the value that you create by flexing their bargaining power. So basically, it means, does anyone else have a one up? Can anyone force you into doing something that you think is not right for your business? A power like that can be detrimental to any business model and has led to the demise of many companies in the past. Coming to Slack. Now, by Slack, we mean organizational complacency. Complacency could be anything. It could be the lack of discipline, or maybe failing to reinvent the organizational culture. Anything that means basically anything that, let's say, severs the operations of a business model is called a slack in the is called a slack in the business model. The last kind of threat, and the most neglected one, is substitution. Can new products decrease the value that customers perceive in your products and services? This is an important question to ask when you're entering the market. Can you foresee another product ever taking you over? For instance, no one had imagined in 2004 when the iPod was launched that something like an iPhone would alleviate its need altogether, right? Nowadays, no one buys iPods because we can do all of that in an iPhone itself. Now, luckily, in this case, it was the same company that came up with the alternative. Had it been another company, Apple may have been in trouble. Does anyone have any questions about threats? Wait.
Manav, could you repeat hold up? Someone has asked for that.
All right. I'll repeat hold up. So the question that you ask when you look at a hold up threat is, can customers, suppliers, or competitors capture the value you create by flexing their bargaining power? For instance, let's say you enter a new market. Let's say you enter the African market, right? And let's say you're in the denim business. Now, if there are larger players in Africa and they have contacts with the government, probably it's going to be easier for them to obtain any kind of license to maybe start a factory. Now, that could be a threat to your business, right? Because being a new player, you don't have contacts in Africa, and another existing player can again use his or her bargaining power to one up you, to gain an advantage over your business. So that is what I mean by a hold up threat. So it's really important to make sure and make decisions like entering a new market wisely. Does that clear up the doubt?
Yeah, Manav, can you move on to substitution? Because that's unclear as well.
All right, I'll read substitution as well. Now, substitution broadly means can another, let's say, can another service or product replace the value that customers get out of your product? All right, like, okay. Now we're going to be taking the example of Kodak in the next slide, but I'll just give you an example. For instance, now earlier we used to take photographs and we used to print them, right? But nowadays we use digital photography. Now a company like Kodak would have to keep in mind the possibility of a replacement like that. And as soon as they recognize this threat, they need to change their business model and modify the business plan accordingly so that they are immune to threats like these. Does that make sense? And
Yeah,
also,
could
guys,
we request?
yeah,
Yeah, could we request you all to switch on your videos? It's really encouraging for the presenter.
please
Um,
send your videos and please send your doubts on the chat box so that everyone else can take a look at them. And if someone else has a similar doubt, it's going to be solved for them as well.
Manav, let's address another question in the chat
Yeah.
from Projit. He wanted to ask how to establish and trust in a credit-based partnership.
How to establish trust in a credit-based partnership. Rojit, can you give me some more context on what do you mean by trust in a credit-based partnership? Credit as in one of the partners having loaned a sum of money to the business. Is that what you mean? All right. In the meantime, I'll answer Samuel's question. Wait, Project says, like if I buy stuff promising payment at the end. So Project, generally, if you're a new firm, no one will trust you in the beginning. So mostly more often than not, you'll be told to sign a contract wherein you pay a down payment, and after the delivery of the services, you get the remaining amount. And it goes both ways. Even if you're buying from a wholesaler, be it buying from a wholesaler or selling to a retailer, it goes both ways. Let's answer Samuel's question. How can a company assess a holder threat? It isn't in our control, is it? Samuel, now that is where market research comes in. That's another topic that we'll be touching upon today. So you need to research the market that you're entering before you decide to make a rash move. If you research the market, you already know who the bigger players are, the advantages that they have, the threats they pose to you, and then you can effectively design your business plan so that you combat those directly before you enter the market. All right, if that's all for the questions, I'll proceed to the next slide. Okay, now we are taking the example of a business model that failed. We're taking the case of Kodak. Can we get to the next slide, please, Smith? All right. Now, Kodak was founded in the late 1880s. It became a giant in the photography industry in the 1970s, and they filed for bankruptcy in 2012. Let's see what ensued. Kodak, yeah, can we get to the next slide, please? Now, Kodak was at the forefront of photography with dozens of innovations and inventions, making this art accessible to the consumer, right? But the reasons that Kodak failed were, we can categorize the reasons into three uh, broadly accessible conclusions, which are: they neglected external threats and failed to reinvent, they were overconfident in their business model, and they were slow in reacting to the changes in the market. Let's learn a little more about the first kind of failure. Companies are often able to see the disruptive forces that affect their industry, yet they show complacency in modifying their business models. Now, let's see what Kodak did in this case. Kodak created a digital camera, invested in the technology, and even understood that photos would be shared online. But where they failed was in realizing that online photo sharing was a new business, not just a way to expand the printing business. So, what Kodak did was, even when they saw companies like Instagram coming in and they saw the trend of online photo sharing, they still wanted to maintain their quo, right? So, what they did was, instead of changing their model, they decided to start printing services. So what they did was, as a customer, they told you to click photographs and send them for printing to their factories. So that was their way of monetizing you for photographs. So in a way, they weren't monetizing you on the camera that they sold to you, they were monetizing you on the printouts that you took for the photographs that you take using their cameras. Secondly, overconfidence. When a company fails to broaden its vision with the changing trends, a company is doomed to fail. Now, Kodak acted like a stereotypical change resistant firm, while on the contrary, a similar competitor of Kodak's, Fujifilm, acted like a flexible one. So they were quick to jump on the digital bandwagon, and they were quick in making modifications in their business model, which is why they were swiftly able to take the market share that Kodak had. Kodak had about 60% market share prior to digital photography, and after that, Fujifilm became the leader instantly, just because they were flexible enough in changing their business model. Does anyone have any questions regarding the failure of a business model?
Guys, you can switch on your mics if you're comfortable with that. We'll address your questions right now.
Right. No, I guess. Is everyone clear about why Kodak failed?
Yes.
All right. Thanks. Let's move to the next slide, Smith. Now we'll be looking at a business model that was successful. We'll be looking at Nike now. Now, this, as you are able to see, is an acquisition timeline of Nike. So Nike made lots of strategic acquisitions over the years as they expanded their business model and their distribution, be it apparel, sportswear, bottles, sports equipment, everything. Can we get to the next slide, please, Smith? Now, Nike's business model was based on demand generation. So they use demand generation as a weapon for business growth, and it spent about $4 billion each year for demand creation in the past 10 years at least. Can we get to the next slide, please, sir? Yeah, all right. So let's highlight the reasons for success of Nike. The first one being customer focus. Nike's main focus was on the athlete's needs, or on what athletes in each sport are trying to accomplish. Like other great branding firms, Nike understands that they are not in the business of selling athletic shoes and apparel. Instead, they took a more empathetic approach. They decided to inspire people to become better athletes and achieve their personal best. Instead of selling the product to them directly, they targeted their mindset and aimed to make them feel something, feel a connection with their product, so that when you think of a shoe, you don't just think about a sports shoe or something that you used to run. You associate it with a feeling of inspiration, with a feeling of wanting to do better in life. So that is a psychological aspect that Nike tapped into. Can we move to the next slide, please? Great. Strategy. The key part of Nike's strategy was category offense. In 2008, Nike reorganized operations around individual sports, and sales have risen 70% since then. The third was mission. Nike understood that they're not just in the business of selling athletic shoes and apparel. Instead, they inspire people to become better athletes and achieve their personal best. Right, exactly. This is a psychological targeting that Nike did. And many firms, even Apple does that to this date. Can we move to the next slide, sir? All right. Emphasis on market research. Now, great. We can link this back to a thread that we just read about. That is the threat of substitution. Now, even though there was no evident threat of substitution, Nike continued reinventing itself. Nike always entered the market with research, and they always strive to make better products. In fact, it embeds researchers within sports team at different levels. The researchers observe what athletes are trying to accomplish and identify where certain products may fall short in helping the athletes achieve those objectives. So basically, even when Nike became the big company or the big brand that is today, it still to this day is on its toes, and they're constantly doing checks and balances within the company itself to ensure that they are meeting their objective. All right. Do we have any questions here? Let's take a pause for questions here.
Yes, Manav, we do in the chat. If you
All
take a look.
Would you say their marketing had a great impact on helping the consumers connect to their products? Yes, their marketing had, I believe, the greatest impact, because Adidas is a competitive firm for Nike, right? But still, Nike holds a majority share because, again, unlike Adidas, they weren't aiming to just sell you shoes. They were aiming to sell you a feeling. For instance, if you've taken a look at Coca-Cola's ads, right? What do they talk about? Do they ever talk about how tasty Coca-Cola is? Do they ever talk about the fizz of the Coca-Cola? Do they ever talk about satisfaction? No. They always talk about the feeling of happiness. So the image that they're creating in your mind is happiness. So whenever you think Coca-Cola, the feeling that you connect with is happiness. You're going to feel happy. You're going to feel like you're going to feel connected. It builds a sense of, let's say, yeah, basically a sense of connectedness. So again, they were just like Nike, Coca-Cola also sells you a feeling instead of the product itself. And that is why Coca-Cola is ahead of Pepsi and Nike is ahead of other shoe competitors in the industry. Even though maybe, if you look at it technically, there isn't a lot of quality difference. There are lots of shoemakers out there that provide the exact or maybe even better quality than Nike. But again, the economic moat that Nike has is that they sell you the feeling of inspiration, of doing better, of striving for your personal best. All right. I hope that answers your question, Senil. Okay. Now let's move to lessons that we can learn from Kodak and Nike. All right. Yeah, guys. Now this is an open question. What do you guys think? What are the lessons that we can learn from Kodak and Nike? Just put in whatever you gathered from what I told you right now. What do you think we can learn from the mistakes that Kodak made and the things that Nike did right? Just add whatever you think. Just put your thoughts in the chat box below, or feel free to unmute yourself and voice your opinion.
Guys, we encourage you to switch on your cameras and mics.
Be flexible and attached to the consumers. Improvising a business will ensure that it stays afloat. Right, Rojit, that's a great point. Getting to know customers' demand from time to time. Be adaptable in the face of new developments in tech and within industries. Keep on updating your products and be open-minded and ready for all changes. Right, correct. These are exactly the answers that we were looking for. We should change our business plans according to the market. Right, Sam. Market research is key. Correct, Rojit. to always stay on top of the changing trends and adapting. Right. I think we are ready to move to the next slide. Okay, let's look at what a revenue model is. Now, to put it plainly, a revenue model is the framework for generation of financial income for a company. It identifies which revenue source to pursue, what value to offer, and who pays for the value. If you look closely at the chart on the screen, right, you can say we have at least 3 different responses for all of these questions. We see who pays. Is it always the client, advertiser, sponsor, and insurer? Now, again, this can vary from company to company. In case of an insurance company, the bank or the company that insures pays the dues. All right, wait, I got that wrong. Let's move to what is paid. Yeah, exactly. Now, what is paid? We don't necessarily transact in cash all the time, right? So, for a company like Amazon, when it's leveraging a deal with, say, your company, maybe you start up a website of your own. So, you may not necessarily pay them in cash. Amazon might ask you the data of the customers that visit your website, right? It could be in kind. Companies often pay one another in shares, and that is even used as an incentive, as a monetary incentive for employees within companies. So this is an example of different methods being used for payments and revenue generation, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be a direct cash transaction. Okay, can we move to the next slide, please? All right, wait, I guess we've had a mix up here. So this slide was for the lessons that we learned from Nike and Kodak. If you guys could give it a read. Yeah, I'm so sorry. For this confusion. This slide was supposed to be before the previous one. All right, Smith, I think we can get to the next slide. So guys, now we're going to be sending you in groups of 5 in a breakout session, where we want you to discuss a little about companies with multiple revenue streams off the top of your head. Just any company that comes to mind that you think has multiple revenue streams. Yeah. We'll be back in 10 minutes.
So guys, I'm going to break you out into 5 different rooms. Please answer this question. And I think we have enough hosts and co-hosts with us to, assist you with the question and help you develop some ideas which you might have. I'm going to send out invitations. You must have seen this pop up. Join it and we'll have like 10 minutes to do so.
Victor, Lisa.
One of the co-hosts can join any group they want to.
Wait, are we supposed to join the breakout rooms too?
Yeah, if you want to.
Yeah. Wait, I believe some of our participants have not been able to join breakout rooms. I see HP, Mithlesh, Nikunj, and Victor are still in the main room. Samuel as well. Can you check if there's an issue, Smith?
They have received the invitation, but they have not accepted it. Maybe.
Yeah, guys, can you please accept the invitation that you're able to see on your screen and join whatever breakout room has been assigned to you? Hello, I'll have to leave to attend another meeting, so I will do this tomorrow. All right, Samuel. Mislesh, are you able to join a breakout room? All right. Now we're waiting for Kanika and Akshita. Are you guys able to join breakout rooms? Yeah, okay. Can we check if Kanika and Akshita are able to join rooms?
Okay, Vigyat asked for help. I'm going to join breakout room number 3. Can you, Manav, also join any breakout room which you like?
I mean, what? Wait a minute. Join breakout.
It's okay, Manav. Yes, Vigyat, I think you asked for help. If it's possible for all of you, can you turn on your mics and video cameras? Yeah.
So what do we need to do over here?
So you need to identify and come up with a company which has multiple revenue streams. It could be Google, it could be any other company. That's a pretty straightforward question. If you want any
Okay.
help with understanding what sort of company are you looking for, should it be based for service or products? It could be anything. Just a company which has multiple revenue streams, like which gets its revenue from different places, which could be online and offline or something else.
Yeah. Thank you.
No problem. You guys can go ahead and discuss what you think might be a company which has many revenue streams.
Walmart.
Can you explain it to me what different sorts of revenue streams would Walmart might have? One is retail. Everyone knows Walmart has huge stores that sells basically everything. What other things could it be? So if you want, I can give you the company name and you just start to figure out what sorts of revenue streams it might have. Think about Amazon. Amazon has a whole bunch of companies like Amazon Internet Services, Amazon Products, Amazon, everything else. Okay, Amazon Prime is a not primary, but a source of revenue for Amazon as a company. What else could it be? What else? How Amazon earns this much money? One is Amazon Prime.
Amazon food basket.
Amazon Food Basket, yeah, and Amazon Pay. Yes, it's also, it charges a premium, let's say 2% whenever you buy anything from Amazon Pay. So that could be one answer. So you have three different sources of revenue for Amazon: Amazon Prime, Amazon Pay, and Amazon Baskets, which also can infer to like all the other products it has on Amazon.com. Basically everything Amazon has on its website. There's one more part which you are missing right now, which Amazon earns a lot from. I'm not sure what Amazon Forest is. If you'd like to tell me.
It was a wild guess, Smith.
Okay. No, Amazon Forest, I don't know if such thing exists, but one thing which Amazon earns a lot of money from is Amazon some services, AMS, Amazon Internet Services or something. I don't remember the exact name, but Amazon owns like 30 or 40% of the entire internet. Amazon Web Services, AWS, yeah. So that's a huge chunk where also Amazon gets its revenue from. I'm gonna see if other groups have gotten any answers. And we'll be, back in main room in 1 minute. There's one more part where Amazon earns a lot of money from. Amazon's just popping, like buying out customers' money every way it can. Vigyat, can you think of any, or Krish, if you got any answers? I think Nikita also might have answers or might not. Okay, I'm just gonna tell you the answer that Amazon offers a lot of advertising on its website and everything else. So if you want to place something in your place something on Amazon.com, you have to pay a premium to get it up on their search list. Okay, I'm gonna close the rooms. See you back in the main room. Is everyone back? I hope you had fruitful discussion about what sorts of revenue modules your different companies which you selected has.
We still have 10 people remaining.
Okay, let's
Still
just wait
have
a few seconds for them to, come
10.
back to the
Just
main
wait
room.
for everyone to come back to the main room, right?
Yeah, we have 20 more seconds until they come back. I think breakout room 1 is having a deep discussion about what sorts of companies and revenue streams they might have.
Right.
Okay, everyone should be here right now. If anyone wants to discuss and say what company and what revenue models did they think of.
Yeah, guys, feel free to unmute yourselves or type in the chat box the companies that you talked about in your breakout room. Just mention the companies you talked about and mention the revenue streams that you think they have. Apple, yeah, Prisha, correct. Apple has multiple revenue streams.
Yes, Vikyut, you may go ahead. You can unmute yourself.
So our breakout room discussed about Amazon and their revenues are generated from Amazon Pay, Amazon Pay services, then Amazon Prime, then internet services given by Amazon. So they have a specific shares for some company of 40% shares.
Right, right, Vigya. They do have a diverse revenue stream. They get money from, like you said, Amazon Pay. Then the web model that you talked about, I think you're talking about AWS. That's Amazon Web Services. So they sell cloud
Yeah.
computing software to big companies, and then again they sell smart speakers. Also, yeah, they own many small businesses. They have Whole Foods in the United States, so that's like a grocery chain, a premium grocery chain there. Correct. Does anyone else want to share what they talked about in their breakout room?
I think in the
Yeah,
chat somebody talked about Microsoft.
Microsoft.
Yeah.
Okay, who said Microsoft? Projit said Microsoft. Consumer goods and cloud computing. Yeah, right. Microsoft licenses Windows, then they sell computers of their own. They also sell cloud computing software like Office 365 that all of us use. Correct. And Microsoft is a great example. Yeah, Facebook is correct as well, Sayam, because they get ad revenue. Then they have lots of licensing, and they also have, now it's a lesser known fact, but Facebook also owns a payment software just like Amazon Pay. It's not used widely, but yeah, it still provides them whatever little revenue. Walt Disney, correct, Sayanil. This Walt Disney is a great example, Sayanil. Disney has multiple parks. They sell toys, they produce movies. Then they've just released their Disney Plus subscription as well. Tata, right, Ruchit? Tata, Reliance, these are great examples from India. Okay, Apple, right, yeah, very good.
Alibaba.
Yeah, Alibaba. HP mentioned Alibaba. Alibaba has a model similar to Amazon, right?
Alibaba also has its Alipay and other social media platforms in China. So I think Alibaba also has, very diverse platform,
Yeah, they own
which,
lots of
yeah.
real estate as well. They're into many businesses within mainland China. All right. Uh, Wait a minute. Yeah. So, generally it is advisable for companies to have multiple revenue models to account for contingencies in the business environment. For instance, the coronavirus outbreak has been a great disruptor for businesses all over the world. So, an example of, let's say, a company that has multiple revenue models and is lesser known. None of you name this company. Let's get to the next slide, Smith.
Before we get to the next slide, can we request everyone, if it's possible for you to turn on your video camera so we can click a photograph with you all? And it is pretty interesting to have all these people from all over the world.
Yes, guys, please turn on your videos so that we can take a photograph, and we'll be uploading it to the Entrepreneurs Deck Instagram page.
I guess the photo must be done by now. I'll start presenting my screen again. Thank you everyone so much.
All right. Let's get to the next slide, Smith. So the company we are talking about is Red Bull. That's correct. Red Bull has multiple revenue streams. Let's give you a brief introduction about Red Bull. In 1982, Austrian businessman Dietrich Mateschitz found himself suffering from jet lag during his business trip to Thailand. So he was advised to try a local drink in Thailand, which was called Krating Diang over there. This improved his former lack of vigor substantially, and inspired by the qualities of this product, Mateschitz decided to bring the product home in the format of a brand new product category, the energy drink. All right. Okay. So let's look at Red Bull's multiple revenue services. Now, of course, it earns from energy drink sales, but it also earns from sponsoring sports teams and Red Bull Media House. Let's see how. Let's get to the next slide, please. The number one contributor to Red Bull's revenue, of course, sales from the energy drink lineup that they have. It currently dominates the world's energy market with a market share of over 40%. And as of 2012, they were selling about 5 billion Red Bull cans per day. Can we get the next slide, please? Right. Now, you may ask, how do they earn from sports and sponsorship? So, Red Bull sponsors a number of extreme sporting events, including cliff diving, BMX, skiing, flying downhill, and freeride mountain biking and skateboarding, among others. Red Bull's logo can be often spotted on the parachutes of base jumpers and wingsuiters. In 2012, Red Bull even sponsored the world record breaking skydive in which Felix Baumgartner broke the sound barrier in free fall. So it sponsors F1 races, it owns sports teams, it sponsors concerts, different sorts of events. So yeah, this again is a great revenue stream for Red Bull. And Red Bull again does that just for the sake of creating an image in the customer's mind. Now they market their brand more than they market the energy drink itself. So just because Red Bull is an energy drink, so just to create that image of edginess, Red Bull invests in all sorts of events and sponsors extreme sporting adventure events like the ones that I just mentioned. Okay. Lastly, this is a lesser known Red Bull initiative, which is the Red Bull Media House. Red Bull is also represented in the music arena by its music production company, Red Bull Media House. They collaborate with many well-known artists, one of which is Avol Nation. In addition to the music industry, Media House is responsible for Red Bull TV Online, Red Bull Radio, and numerous other projects and products. Apart from that, Red Bull also makes lots of money from endorsements, advertisements, and content creation. Now, most of their concerts and music-related investments most of these are concentrated in Europe. So all over the world, their major investments come in again. Their major revenue again comes in from sales of their energy drinks and their investments in F1 and other sporting teams. They also own, I believe, 2 football teams in the UK, if I'm not wrong. All right. Now that was enough for me. If you guys have any questions,
Manav, there's a question in the chat.
all right. Can you please read it out to me? What question are we talking about?
How can it be a revenue stream if it's just marketing?
Projit, can you give us some more context? What do you mean by just marketing? They sponsor these events, right? So when they sponsor these events, Projit, they also take a cut in the earnings. So for F1 races, they get commission. For whatever concerts that they sponsor or invest in, they generally get either a fee or a percentage of, let's say, the sales, the ticket sales. So that's how they earn from these events. Was I able to
Any more
clear it out,
questions?
Projit? Yeah, no worries. Any other questions, guys?
Okay, put them in the chat if any.
Yeah, put the questions in the
move.
chat if any, and we'll make it a point that we answer them for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Over to Priyanshi, I guess. Thank you so much for listening, guys.
Yeah, thank you, Manav. So now we move on to another aspect of the business plan, which is market research. We're going to cover what is market research and its significance. We're also going to look at different market research techniques and tools that helps businesses make informed decisions. We will look at how market trends can help businesses carry out effective market research and reach its potential target customer using a tool called Pestle analysis. We will look at companies that use developing and testing market strategies with the help of market research. So this is a basic question. What is market research? Market research is essentially the process of collecting, analyzing, and reporting data related to a particular market. It is the process of determining the viability of a new product or service through research conducted directly through potential consumers. Also, market research includes data on consumption of goods and services and on competitors' behavior. Most importantly, businesses use market research information to make informed decisions. So informed decisions are made by businesses because they now have perfect information of the market, and they can now know the pattern of the of the market research, whether there is demand or not. Okay, so now we're going to have Smith, can you go back to the previous slide, please? We're going to have another breakout room activity. Suppose you're the owner of an XYZ company, and now you have to share what market research techniques will you use to ensure the success of a new product line that you wish to introduce. Right. So, Smith, are we ready for the breakout room activity? Okay.
Som, are you facing any technical difficulties, or are you not getting the invitation? Hello everyone. Can I ask everyone to open their, turn on their video cameras and also mics, if possible, so we have a fruitful discussion. We can send it using online forms. That's correct. Online polls. That's also correct. Does any of you know what sorts of, there are two types of market research, primary market research that which is required while we do market research. So does anyone know the two categories?
No.
So two categories are qualitative and quantitative market research. So in qualitative, you identify the customer pinpoints and you take comments. It's most likely text based and not numbers. Quantitative includes numbers. For example, how much time do you spend on using this device, or what amount of money are you willing to spend on to buy this product, and that sorts of things. So maybe you can think about that and those two categories and how that helps you to find out the different types of market research you need to do, market research techniques you need to do to make sure a product is a success. It could be in terms of marketing, it could be in terms of finance, it could be in terms of pricing, it could be to just know what the customers expects from a company.
So basically right now we can take up any company of our choice on then
Yeah.
like we basically have to jot down the points that we would use to do the analysis or marketing.
It's not necessary for you to list down or come up with a company, but then if you have any product in mind, whatever the product may be, what sorts of techniques do you need, or what sorts of tools do you need to do the market research is the question. Because the question says you are owner of XYZ company, which could be any company, whether it's based in service sector or primary sector making products. So you need to find out what market research techniques will you use. So there are questionnaires, surveys, interviews. What will you use and what makes more sense, which will give you the most insightful most insightful answers from the customers and also other shareholders, stockholders, shareholders.
So when we are doing the survey, do we only have to cater to the customers or to the shareholders as well?
It's not specific to anything. For example, it depends on what the aim for your market research is. For example, if you are wanting to know about whether or not what your product will work with actual customers or not, it's obvious that you have to, research more and send out these questionnaires and surveys to the customers and not the shareholders, because of course shareholders are backing up the idea. And if you are looking for finance, and if you are looking if the idea is viable enough to run it internally, for example, if it's possible to produce it in our country or somewhere else, you may have to involve the shareholders and also executive team which you have. So it depends on what sorts of things you are aiming to find when you do the market research.
All right.
Yeah. If you guys have any other questions, let me know.
In the presentation before, Priyanshi mentioned some particular type of research analysis. I don't know, starting with P. I don't remember.
Pestle and SWOT are also analysis which could be done. SWOT is normally done by internal factors. SWOT means strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. To be honest, we're also working on SWOT in our college right now. So strengths and weaknesses of a SWOT are internal aspects of a business, and opportunities and threats are something which happens outside the company, which you don't have any control over. For example, COVID-19, no one would have thought of that this would happen or this would hamper their business. So it's an external threat. Also, COVID-19 may also be an opportunity for many businesses such as streaming services. We also have a wonderful session planned for COVID-19 and business, which I am personally handling. So please make sure you attend that one. It's the last session though. Oh yeah, it's what is very necessary component to do anything in life. It also helps you build personal traits or something. You can also use it apart from non-business functions. Also, another thing which Priyanshi mentioned, which I think Arohi referred to, is pestle analysis. So pestle is spelled PESTLE, and this is an acronym for a very large concept which is known as political, economical, social, technological, legal, and ecological factors. So these pestle analysis is mainly done to analyze external environment, because you don't have any control over political factors. You don't know what's going to happen in the next day, if it's going to rain or not, whether we would have earthquake or not. Also, technological factors, you may or may not have full control over new technology being introduced in the market and helping you produce a new thing better. For example, no one would have thought 50 years back that robots are gonna produce the entire cars and everything. So these pestle analysis is used to analyze external factors and make sure you are on top of everything and you know what you are going into. And also, if there are any changes happening in the market, which pestle and SWOT analysis helps you to find, you are prepared for it, which is also something which we are going to talk about in the upcoming modules, which is known as contingency planning and crisis management.
So basically, Pestle is mainly focusing on the outside factors, whereas SWOT is both outside as well as inside factors.
Yeah, SWOT is much more direct to your company, like what things affect your company. But Pestle is, in general. For example, any governing party may change. For example, in India, BJP might be thrown over by Congress, so that completely changed the directive. Congress is a political party in India which has different motives than other parties, so that might change the laws and also the way things operate, because no one would have thought like demonetization would happen in India, and it did. And it affected many businesses in and around India. So that's what Pestle analysis is for, assessing the external factors and making sure the changes that are happening in the market. These are the strategies to know the environment in and around your company, like internal and external. Other factors which also I have personally used in my high school while doing market research is using basic questionnaires, which you guys have also mentioned in the chat, sending out forms to participants, and also different consumers around where your headquarters is, to know whether or not they are interested in the project and it would be financially feasible for them to introduce a new product or a service in market. So if you send out, for example, if you're developing a sanitizer, let's take yesterday's example, and then that no one's going to buy it because of the market research, because it's too expensive. Like you say, 200 ml bottle for 10,000 rupees. No one's going to buy that thing. If you do market research, no one's going to buy. But market research also helps you to analyze and develop market strategies. So you may want to reevaluate your pricing strategy and lower down your prices so that more people can afford it. So market research is not basically collecting information, but also collecting information and processing that information to make sure your business operates as it's supposed to, and also caters to any consumer demands which they might or might not have. Okay, I'm going to post something on the breakout room broadcast and message that we only have 2 minutes. 1 minute actually. While I do that, if you have any other questions, please let me know right now through mic or through chats. I'm happy to answer. Just a second. Like high price, less consumers, low price, more consumers. To be honest, that's a very subjective thing to say. To be honest, that's very subjective answer, because high prices are also, high prices are maybe sometimes thought of as quality products. So some people might buy a particular product even if it's expensive, because they know they're going to get the quality. For example, you can take the iPhones. They are super expensive, but people do buy them because they know what they're getting into and what the price has to offer in terms of the quality which they'll get. So it's not necessary that low prices will always yield more consumers, because it may not do so. It's also case with Walmart. Walmart sells very cheap products, but still they are, getting all the things which they have to. Okay, I'm gonna go back to the main room. Fruitful discussion which we had. If anyone wants to speak up what we have discussed, please do so in the main room. I think people are just coming back from their groups. Let's give it 30 seconds more.
Yeah.
Yeah. If someone has any questions regarding, the breakout rooms which we organize right now, or the things which you have discussed in your groups, please feel free to ask Priyanshi. I'm sure she's more than capable of answering any questions you might throw at her.
Yeah, definitely. Feel free to do that.
Also, guys, just like you did in the last breakout room, why don't you guys share some of the insights from your breakout room discussions over here? Feel free to unmute yourself and speak, or add them to the chat box.
So hi, I'm Projit. In my breakout room, we were discussing how could market research help us. Like I was pitching right yesterday, we were talking about toothpaste. Sorry. So I was thinking that if I have to pitch a toothpaste brand, I would first check out the local dentists in my area, seeing who have what problems. Like if someone got cavity or dental plague, like I would see the
Right.
intensity of people in these places. If I get to know that this place has hard water or so, which contribute to these problems, then I could be able to pitch my product better to those places rather than
Right.
those who won't contribute better to my business.
Okay, definitely. That's fascinating. Any more sharings?
Yeah, check out the chat.
Okay. Could you wait?
Yeah, we discussed how Dhwanil says we discussed how primary research would help us. Could you elaborate, Dhwanil? You could unmute yourself if you want.
Okay. Right. Yeah, that would be great.
Could you elaborate?
Yeah, so we basically discussed how primary research would help us, like by knowing what the client wants from us and what are their demands and all.
Right. So, did you also discuss any potential techniques that you could use under primary research? Obviously, if not, then it's fine. We're going to answer that question.
Anyone else who wants to speak up? Yeah, Vedi, go ahead.
Vaidehi.
We discussed there were online surveys, focus groups, organizations, face-to-face interviews, social media apps through which we can ask about people's opinion, what they think about the product.
Okay, yeah, that's very up to the point. Thank you, Vaidehi. Okay, I think we should move ahead, Smith. Next slide, please.
Before we move ahead, the word of the day for today is marketplace. Please make sure you note this down. I've also put it up on the chats. The word is marketplace and it's pretty simple. If you want to know the meaning of the word, please ask me and I'll just reply to you on chats or over here. Let's move to the next slide, as Priyanshi said.
Right. So essentially, there are two main market research techniques. One group is the primary research, which primary research is the collection of first-hand information from the market. It means that it is a methodology that is used to collect data directly from the potential consumers rather than depending on any third party or a previously done research. Primary research is solely carried out to address a certain problem faced by a business, which also requires an in-depth analysis. The primary market research starts with a qualitative approach in its early stages. So we're going to explore that in the further slides. On the other hand, secondary research is the collection of second-hand information from the market, which means that the information already exists in some form. Secondary research focuses on more of a quantitative based approach of data as it comes on the later stage of the business cycle. So as now that we're aware what is primary and secondary research is specifically designed and conducted for the business's own project, whereas secondary research can be done by any third party and it can be analyzed and applied to your project. Examples of primary research can include surveys, customer interviews, stakeholder interviews, observation, and usability testing. Say, for example, in case of interviews, a computer software firm may want to test a new program. So they set up a computer and watch as individuals use the software. Like focus groups, managers observe behind one-way mirrors. In case of stakeholder interviews, these are the interviews with stakeholders, which are one-to-one conversations about a specific topic or issues. In case of surveys, say for example, a bank may conduct 300 phone surveys to measure how satisfied consumers are with its customer service. In case of secondary research, there are industry and trade publications, social media and websites, which is like a very huge platform to conduct a reliable market research. There's marketing and consumer list and newspaper and media. Some of them are mass media techniques, which addresses to a huge media at one spot only. Yeah, next, Smith. So there are mainly two basic market research methods as well. One is a quantitative based approach and another is a qualitative based approach. Now, quantitative based approach is more associated with secondary research method because there is use of statistical analysis using various mathematical, technical, and computational techniques. Examples include surveys and questionnaires. The quantitative research essentially tries to quantify the attitudes, behaviors, opinions, and viewpoints of a sample of people, which is then extrapolated for a full sample. And qualitative approach, on the other hand, is associated primarily with the primary research method because it helps the firms explore various ideas and gather diverse opinions on that particular information. The insights of the primary research are then used to explore various business decisions. Examples of qualitative approach can be interviews and observation, as it is more of a qualitative based, and since observations cannot be quantified, it comes under this aspect. Smith, could you change the slide?
Priyanshu,
I think we have a question.
Right, sorry, I didn't see that. Can you,
yeah. Can we conduct quantitative research if we are adept with the computational models? Projit is asking.
Sorry, can you repeat?
Can we conduct quantitative research if we are adept with the computational models?
So yes, that would be a wise decision to make since we're already adapted with the computational models. We know what kind of sources to look for and which sources are more reliable and which ones are less. For example, Wikipedia to do any sort of research is a highly unreliable platform. And if we're more knowledgeable with the computational models, it will be better to go with a quantitative method. But again, there are advantages and disadvantages of each form. Can the quantitative method create and analyze trends in the market to do with demand and supply? So yes, yeah, so we're going to cover that different trends are responsible as to how the market functions. So there are forces of demand and supply, which at the end brings the entire business and the market to an equilibrium point. Right. Then there are different online tools for market research. With Google, there are trends, alerts, forms, and keyword planners. With trends, the Google Trends allows to track which keywords are increasing popularity. So if a certain word is used frequently on the online platform, the Google can track it, and it is a source of market research as businesses can now know that what is increasing in popularity. With Google Alerts, they help actively understand consumer trends, behaviors, and activities. The Google Forms collect specific data and are more customized based, which is more of a qualitative base, as the questions are on a personal level. The keyword planners receive a number of searches and suggested keywords. It is similar to the Google Trends. With social media, for the Twitter Insights, it has a powerful tool called Audiences, which allows the businesses to drill down on types of things that their followers and customers are interested in. Instagram's Insights and engagement. Then we have Facebook Insights, which is basically about what kind of material resonates best with the current market. And business pages on Facebook is also very valuable for businesses. There are also post variety of different content, for example, engagements and Facebook ads, which are sometimes also paid. Right. Next, and over to you, Sania.
I think we have one question by Julius, if I'm not spelling it wrong.
Right.
Are there businesses whose marketplace is better in less developed or rural areas than cities and in towns?
So again, it all depends on what your product is. What are you trying to sell to the entire market? So it is that's a subjective question. But again, to answer that in one sentence, it is not compulsory that businesses are that the marketplace is better in less developed areas than in cities and other towns. Because again, it depends on the type of product that you're wanting to sell in the marketplace.
Hope
I
that
hope
answers
that
your
answers your
question.
question.
Yeah, okay. So we'll move on to PESTEL analysis. So PESTEL is basically, it stands for political, economical, social, technological, legal, and ecological factors in the environment. So it's basically external marketing factors, which are also known as macro environment factors that have an effect on an organization, whether it's directly or indirectly. So the outcome of this type of analysis actually pinpoint certain threats and weaknesses that a business might be unknowingly exposed to. And this is actually the basis for market research on how it actually shapes your business. So for example, if we talk about each type of thing discussed here, so for example, in political environment analysis, you look at the political situation of your country. So basically, what your government's reaction or stand is towards a certain type of a business. For example, in India there are and in most countries in fact there are high taxes on tobacco and alcohol and all of that. So it would discourage and it's actually basically to discourage the production. So yeah, so it would actually discourage the production. So then if you're thinking of going into that stream, you'll have to think of the political environment of your country. If we talk about economical factors, we again talk about what kind of taxes there are, what kind of rebates, so everything related to the economy of the country. So moving on to social factors, then social factors are the customs, traditions, festivals, and demand related to all those customs, traditions, and festivals in the country. So, for example, if you are looking to go into, say, a chocolate uh, selling business, then you would actually look at diversifying or marketing your product during festivals, like for example, if we focus on, if you're in a country like the United States, then you would focus on marketing more of your chocolates during Christmas or Easter. You would diversify into chocolate eggs during Easter. If you're in India, then you will do that. You can introduce new packaging, look at what different kind of ways you can market your product during festivals like Raksha Bandhan and something like that. So those constitute social factors. Then technological factors, what kind of technology do you have in your country? What kind of licenses do you need for that technology? So that determines how you produce your product. And that's a very important factor because technology is always changing and it's very dynamic right now. So you have to take a look at that before you start your business. Legal environment, what are the laws and institutions making laws in your country? Do you think they could change for the better or for the worse in the near future? How are basically the laws in the country? Is it legal to actually go into a stream you're going to for your business? All of that. And ecological factors are basically environmental factors, both abiotic and biotic. And you look at them to see if your business is actually even feasible. Yeah, so that's called PESTEL analysis. Next slide.
I think we have another question, which was,
Should I address them right now?
yeah, because it was related to a previous slide. Maybe it's better if we just address it right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's say selling a product that people in the rural areas are not exposed to, like computers, certain beverages or services like massage and spa. are there businesses that will sell better in a less developed area, like the marketplace is suitable for less developing? Yeah, yeah. So if you are selling a product like a technology, and rural areas are not familiar with that kind of technology, so first of all, that's a really good idea to get into that and actually educate them first. So now that would add to your cost because you need to educate them before actually selling it to them, and you'll have to take care of your price points according to the demographics. But yeah, so there are certain kind of businesses which would function better simply because those are the products that the area is already using. But if they're not doing that, then also you have a great uh, prospect to actually introduce your product and be the first one to sell it there. So if you are the only one who is selling computers in a remote village somewhere, people are going to come to you and you'll get all that business, right? So yeah, it's not necessarily, again, it's very subjective. Like Priyanshi said, you can't necessarily say that a certain business will perform better, but it also depends on the demographics of that area. I hope that answers your question. Should I? Okay. So next we move on to developing and testing market strategies. So whatever you've learned till now, how are you going to put it to use and how are you going to go about it? So first of all, I'd like to put it out there that market research, because the market is so dynamic, market research never really stops. So market research firstly should be a part of your ongoing strategy and not just a one-time event. You cannot be done with it while you're starting, before starting your business, or when you just start your business, or when you launch a new product. You have to constantly, update your market research. So it's not a one-time event. Then you have to develop a regular schedule for collecting and analyzing data, because again, data keeps changing. You need to have a regular schedule. So for example, let's say a company decides to do it every 2 months or every 3 months or every 2 to 3 weeks even. Now I don't know if that would be feasible for a large company, but for small companies, they can do that using any of the free online tools or even paid ones if they're capable of doing that. And then industries, markets, and trends change over time, so it's a good idea to revisit your goals and plans on a regular basis so that you can make necessary changes. For example, you're selling a product which is no longer in demand in the market and you're still selling it, you'll obviously go into losses, and then you have a lot of inventory left because no one's buying your product. So in order to not go into that situation, you have to be regular and make changes in your business model all the time using market research strategies. And you can measure the effectiveness of your market strategies in a few ways. You might want to gather information on the reach of your marketing campaign to make sure potential customers actually see your ads. So earlier I was talking about your product, but now I'm talking about your strategy. So how you're actually selling and advertising your product, that may have to change because maybe certain people are not interacting with your product. For example, you have a product which is targeted towards, say, an older audience, also known as boomers or whatever. And then so you cannot, so maybe they're not, you're advertising on social media and maybe they're not seeing your ads. So like mentioned before, McDonald's targets children, but children don't have the purchasing power. In this case, many of these this older generation has most of those people have the purchasing power, so they need to see your ads in order to, and even if they don't, because they're full grown adults, they need to see your ads in order to engage with your product. So if they are not seeing your ads on Instagram or Facebook, then you might need to switch to ads on a TV or a billboard or something. So that's what I'm talking about when I say that you have to test the effectiveness of your marketing strategy. And you might want to gather information on your marketing campaign through using these marketing strategies as itself. Like you might have to conduct a poll or a survey regarding your advertisements. Like, have you seen it? Have you heard about our product? Something like that. And so engagement or how people respond to your ads is another metric you should definitely track. And I think that's how you should go about your market strategies. Over to, yeah, okay, so we're done for today. Smith, would you like to conclude?
Yes. Thank you everyone for joining in today again. I'm gonna repeat the word of the day again, which is marketplace. Please make sure you note it down, and also Don't forget to check your emails because we sent out a post class form on Google Forms which has many questions regarding the stuff which we deliver. You have to answer that and also include the word of the day in there, so we know that you have been attending these sessions, and based on that you will get your certificates. Also, I'd like to thank all of you who are joining us in the morning or afternoon or evening, wherever you are from. I'd like to thank you again, and I hope you learned a lot in this session. And we also have interesting guest speakers tomorrow and a few activities planned for this same module, which is business plan. We hope to see you there. The timings for the tomorrow session is the same, so please make sure to note that too. And I don't have anything else to say. If Manav maybe wants to conclude.
Yeah, just a minute, sorry. There were these few questions we couldn't address, just I think 2 of them. So if Astha and Sayam would like to stay back right now, and anyone else who wishes to listen to these questions.
So we are gonna hang out for a few more minutes for you guys to answer your questions, and also if you have any recommendations for us. So please do use this chat feature or raise your hand or turn on your mics to ask any questions which you might have. Sorry, Sanya, to interrupt you.
That's fine. So let's address Sayam's question. He said, how should we divide our money in the business plan? So he asked this question when Sarah was speaking, if Sarah is still here.
Yeah, okay. So how should we divide our money in the business plan? I'm guessing you mean like what do you include in the financial section? So like I said, there's 3 financial statements that come under it. It's profit and loss, balance sheet, and cash flows. So that's like the basic way that you do it on the business plan. But if you're speaking in terms of like how you as an individual should go about like dividing money for your product, then I guess you need to come up with a plan on how you're going to divide profits. Because if you are the only person in the business then obviously you're the sole owner of all profits. But then you need to think about like what percentage of that profit goes into research and development and manufacturing and marketing and all of that. So I would say division of profits is very important. You need to show that in your financial plan, because again, that's what your business sustains on. And then you also need to show how you're going to use any savings or loans that you gain. How are you going to divide that in order to like use it effectively and also like pay back any interest on them? So I think that's the most basic answer to how you would divide it. If you have a more specific scenario, you can put it in the chat, but like from the question that you put, that's like the most basic answer I can give.
Thanks, Sarah. That's clarified. And also, I'm not sure if Manav addressed this, but Astha asked, does Red Bull earn more money by selling energy drinks or by marketing projects it has?
Yes, I did answer this before and I'll repeat. Yes, Red Bull does have multiple revenue streams, but again, selling energy drinks is their, selling energy drinks contributes the most to their revenue.
Yeah, okay, that's all. Everything else we have answered. Guys, just staying here if you have any doubts or questions or suggestions, feedback, anything.